You think you know the whole story of the Chavarria brothers, but until you hear Chendo's side of the story, you won't know the full story. Welcome to another episode of the Son of a Podcast. Today is a very special episode. During the Christmas holidays, you'll probably see that I'm wearing different clothes to the actual podcast. This is because I'm recording the intro afterwards. Due to the fact that we filmed for 2 hours during this podcast, so we've decided to split it up into two, this podcast and next week's podcast. And during this episode, we are going to be talking about Chendo's early life, how he grew up, where he grew up, what he thought about it kind of, and his life journey through moving away from Spain, how he got different jobs and how he ended up in Miami where he currently lives. Hope you guys enjoy it and welcome to another episode. Yeah, you guys want to say anything before we get on started with it?
I would like to say I'm so happy to be here where the action happens. Yeah. You know, finally, here sitting in your pod, Gabe, so ready to go.
And
well, that's great.
We're drinking beer, so
yeah,
God knows what could happen.
It's going to be a good one. That's how you know it's going to be good if alcohol gets mixed in. So we've kind of gone over the beginning of, I guess, the three of your lives twice already, sort of. But I want to get your opinion on it. And I don't know if you listened to Fred's accounts and my dad's accounts before?
Yes.
Did you kind of agree with mostly what they said? Do you see
some parts of it. No, not in everything, no. I must say,
we're there already. Okay. Let's do it.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, can you give your version of the accounts or of what happened?
But not the facts. I mean, the facts are, we all agree on.
Yeah.
You know, we used to live in Madrid. We came.
Yeah. Right.
If you're doubting about that, just look at our previous podcasts and you'll figure out what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Our infancy.
Okay. So where do I begin? Where do you want me to begin?
Well, okay, how about what do you disagree with, or what did you, when you listened to it, you're like, oh, that's not really what happened, or that's not how you felt maybe?
Got it, right. So the first thing I'll say is, you know, I haven't been able to listen to all of the episodes, so there might be things I'm missing, right? So some of this stuff might be out of context, so just bear with me on that. So one thing I heard that I don't necessarily agree with is that I'm like some uber corporate guy, right? You know, just because I work in a big company and I work, you know, like in the U.S.
What do you do?
Huh?
What
I work at Visa.
What's your title? What do you do for?
I'm
just joking, man.
What is it? To tell us.
I'm my vice president for market services.
You're like Chandler, man.
I'm like Chandler. Nobody knows what the hell I do.
So you'll just say it. Sorry,
I'm vice president for go-to-market services.
At Visa.
For Visa, yes, exactly.
But you're not a corporate guy. Come on, carry on.
Okay, so I work in a corporation. I do that, right? Like a lot of other people, but I don't feel that I'm somebody who thrives in that environment. I'm not a corporate person. I'm a massive introvert. Victor knows this, right? I'm a massive introvert. I've had to learn to behave otherwise as I've taken on different jobs and different responsibilities. But for me, working in a company is hard. It isn't something that comes natural, right? Corporate people typically, they're a very, very similar kind of stereotype of people. You know, they're your kids who were, you know, very competitive in school, you know, very ambitious, that kind of person, right? You know, I was never that. I used to read, stay home and read a lot of stuff, and I thought I wanted to write. And so for me, working in a big company, something that I ended up doing because for a really long time I said I was going to be a poet and an artist and a writer, and I found myself not writing and not poeting, right, and not doing anything. So I said, well, you know, this is not the way to go. So I found a job, and that job has not turned into a career, but I've never felt comfortable and never feel comfortable like in a corporate environment. So that's the one thing that I would say that I didn't agree eye to eye, right? Because I'm incredibly shy. It's hard work for me every day. I got to motivate myself. I have to sort of, you know, be in the grind. It's a really intense job. It keeps me busy for many hours a day, but it isn't something that I would ever say is a pleasurable experience. That's the truth, right? So for me, therefore, that's why I'm not a corporate guy.
Perfect.
Right? So that's setting the record straight, Gabe, right away, right?
Fair enough.
Okay. I'm a humanities guy at heart, but I've
That is true. I did say
I have a
in
job.
those podcasts.
Yes.
You're always been into
Yes.
writing.
No, and totally. Like, I mean, I'm glad you see it that way because maybe other people think I'm a badass at work too.
No,
That's amazing.
I think what I mostly meant, rather than being a corporate guy, I do mention that, I do say it like that, but I'm not very good with words. It's more that I meant that you were following the benefits that come with a corporate lifestyle. So nice, basically never be a starving artist like I've always been. That kind of thing.
Right.
I guess that's what I...
Would it be accurate to say that you kind of grew out of the starving artist thing a bit sooner than he did? Would that be accurate?
Maybe 30 years.
Yeah, no, but sure, right? Because look at it right now. You're wearing a shirt, right?
I am.
You just been at work today.
Yeah,
right?
I don't normally dress like this. You all know I've just finished work. So.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would like to believe, and maybe, who knows, right? Maybe this will never come to pass, but what I would like to believe is that I kind of deferred it a little bit. And what I mean by this is that, and you guys have talked about this in previous episodes, right, Gabe? I found myself in a position where, I was lucky that I ended up in London, in the UK, and that opened up opportunities for work and to make money. And I had never made money, right? So, just kind of for the record, right? Before I ever moved to London, right, I had basically 3 jobs here in Torremolinos, right? When I was here after I came back from the US with Al. I was a private English tutor, a Spanish tutor, right? Pretty much for free. So, I mean, I call it a job because it gave me experience, but I made no money from it. Then I was stocking shelves at, Glenn Davis's supermarket. So I was a stock boy, right? Him and I used to go around the back and put baked beans and all those sort of interesting food English people eat. Okay. And then my third job was, I was a waiter in a Mexican restaurant in Marbella, right? And so for me...
I forgot about that. What was it called?
Dos Coyotes.
Dos Coyotes.
Yes, yeah. Not there anymore, but Dos Coyotes,
Dos
yeah.
Coyotes.
And so for me, moving to the UK was a chance to just do something more meaningful with my life.
Was that a spur of the moment thing? Sorry to bother. Was that moving to the UK thing? Was that just like one day you woke up and spoke to Lorena?
No. You know what it was? It was Glenn. Glenn moved to London, right. And he said, "Hey."
The guy you worked with stuck in the
supermarket.
Glenn
Davis. Yeah, Glenn Davis, our high school chum
from my class
from Sunnyview School, another Sunnyview graduate. He moved to London. He had a job there, literally installing cable TV for government contracts in the city of London, and he said, "You should come. We could have a job for you there now. If you may not know Gabe, but your dad." And and Al, they know how technical and how gifted I am in the manual art. So, but I decided I took the job. So literally, I was, driving around central London in a van with 3 or 4 genetically working class English guys. Some of them were Irish or whatever, and we would go around different housing estates in London, literally going into like sort of weird dungeons and strange areas of the place, like drilling holes to run cable through, right? But for me, that was an opportunity to find more meaningful work. Lorena Victor's mom came over after that. Said, "Well, look, I'm moving to London. We're going to start a new life there," and the rest is history. And then,
what year was that? Sorry,
this is 1994.
1994.
And then I did that for 3 months, and obviously, I didn't want to continue to do that. So Alex Garayeb, another Sunnyview graduate, was getting his MBA at Imperial College, but he had a part-time job at Visa. And he said, "Well, why did you apply here?" Because, they always look for people who speak languages, and it's an international organization. So I literally had an electric typewriter, and I must be the only person in the world who's ever gotten a job at Visa presenting a resume typed with an electric typewriter. Poof, 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 poof. I showed up with a white cable knit cotton sweater from, I think, the Gap, with a blue denim shirt that I had from New York, with a yellow Mickey Mouse necktie that I bought with Al in Chinatown, and somehow I landed that job in a temperate. So anyway, that's how it started.
You were in the switchboard or something, right? At first,
I was in the service center almost. We used to do authorizations. It was called the Visa Service Center. We used to do authorizations and.
Do I remember this correctly? You might get you fired if they're trying to get rid of you. This might do it. But didn't you brag that you spoke Italian? I seem to
Yes.
recall you trying to learn Italian in a hurry.
Totally. You're absolutely right. The job required, 2 European languages other than English. And so I bluffed and I said, well, I'm fluent in Italian. And I was just like so lucky that the lady who interviewed me for my Italian spoke actually worse than I did. And somehow I got this job. But it was traumatizing because like literally the first 3 months of me getting this job, I was in the bus and in the tube. I bought this book. I still remember it. Hugo was the publisher. Learn Italian in 3 months. And I'll be there reading this thing, and then I'll be on the phone with Italians.
No YouTube at that time, right?
No. So
Duolingo.
Yeah.
Duolingo.
So yes, I
Hey,
bluffed
can
it.
you remember your script when you picked up the phone, wasn't it? Because when you picked up the switchboard, you had to say. You remember that?
Yeah. Visa Service Center. Chendo speaking. How can I help you?
What's your title now?
Vice President, Global Market Services.
Hey,
Yes, it's
30 years.
It's a global role.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Moved up
Got
in
there.
life.
But the point is that, when I landed that job, I told myself, I said, never quit this job unless you've got something better, right? Because
This is advice.
prior to that,
Can you look at the camera and say that
Yeah.
to those people watching that are thinking I'm going to quit my job?
actually, no, I won't recommend that because I should have had the balls to be more bold, right? Okay. But at the time, for me, when I was coming from making literally 10,000 pesetas, I think it was like 10,000 pesetas a month I made with Glenn, right? And all the other jobs I had.
Is
That's
now
what you said.
50
Oh,
bucks.
sorry,
That's
10,000
around-
pesetas a week, I think. It was like $1,000 a week? No, that was too
No,
much.
it's too
No,
much.
that's too much.
That's too
10,000
much.
pesetas was 60
Just
euros.
10,000 a month.
60
Something like
euros. 60
Yeah.
euros, more or
Yeah,
less.
right?
No, 6 euros is 1,000 pesetas. 60 euros is 10,000 pesetas. Yeah.
So
60 euros a week.
240 a month.
240 euros a month.
All right.
So then I thought, well, never again. I thought this was, and the other thing is, and this has also come up in previous episodes, right? Is where we were as a family back then, right? I realized very soon that
All over the place.
this kind of situation that I had for myself with this new office job, right? This kind of what to me was this amazing fancy job. I was working night shift. I used to work, I used to start work at 8 p.m. and then get out at 7. It was tough, but I thought, my God, I'm making normal money, right? For once in my life. And I thought, well, I can help, right? So then, from that point on, it allowed me to send some money back home, right? To help out mom and dad, a little bit. So for me, it was important for multiple reasons, but especially because it's like, Chendo, get your ass out of the couch. You're talking, you have this big game of, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. You're actually doing nothing. So, right? And so this is, I seized on that opportunity. And from there, this job has allowed me to do what I always wanted to do, which is see the world and get paid for it, right? So that's kind of the way I've thought about it, right?
I have a question just on this topic. How these decisions to sort of get a proper job and earn decent money, and as they would say in Spanish, espabilarte a little bit in that sense. How much of that was just the timing was right for you, and how much was it the influence of your then girlfriend Lorena, who was always been very encouraging to help you make those sort of steps? I was never clear on how much was her and how much was you. Would have happened anyway.
That's a really, so I think something would have happened anyway, because in reality, the opportunity with Glenn came up independently. It was between me and Glenn. But you raise a really good point, because what Lorena has been for me all these years has been like a catalyst. She's always been like encouraging me, like pushing me to go places that I didn't think I could go or should go. And so as an example, 5 years into me starting to work in London, I know I came across in the office this job posting for a position in the US, right? And I had always been interested in, as something you guys have talked about also in previous episodes, I'd always been interested in living in the States. And so I saw it, I dismissed it, and forgot about it until a couple of weeks later. I mentioned it over dinner. I said, hey, by the way, it's funny, I think we were watching a documentary or a travel show on TV. I said, it's funny, there was a job posted for Miami. And, then I was like, well, absolutely, you should apply, you should go for it. Why not? Right? So what she has been is this amazing catalyst and just really encouraging and pushing me to try things that maybe I was afraid to try on my own, kind of thing, right? Or hesitant to attempt. So she's always been there, like this great sort of, motivational kind of influence, because she's very gung-ho. She's very, very different to what I am. Right?
So Dad, I have two things to add. One is that you told me something that really resonated with me. During the time of this working class period, you said that was most meaningful to you because you had a purpose, right?
100%. Thanks for bringing it up. And this is really true because it's funny. In those early days, right? I didn't have a home. You guys remember? I didn't have a house of my own. Yeah. I lived with Glenn, right? My friend Glenn, sleeping in the bedroom he was in his sister's house, who was living there with her boyfriend. Really, we had this bizarre kind of setup there, and it was my God, I can't believe it's I'm living with this guy, going on in a van with these other workers. We're there doing things that I'm terrible at, and everybody knows it, But I was no, it's push ahead, push on, save a little money, get an apartment. So you're right. I've never been so motivated, so driven in my life. Yeah. And I think it was because of the challenges of the situation.
Honestly, that kind of aligns with my research that if you have an objective function, if you have a mission that you want to accomplish, it's going to make your life a whole lot easier, or at least, motivate you to do so. And the second thing I like to add about Mom is that this sort of conscientiousness of wanting to always do the right thing, she always brought it from her father, because her father was a really hard worker, and she always told her that laziness is essentially disease. Never be lazy. And she not only motivated my father to do his best work, but she always motivated me to do my best work. She always told me, Victor, you must follow your passion, because you must do what you love in life, and it's going to come easier to you, but you better work hard. Fun fact, you know how I want to go into a relatively niche field, right? Archiving. Mother always told me, do the MILIS, the Master of Library Information Studies. Do not do an MBA, because you won't be happy and it's going to make your life a bit more, harsh, kind of on the slopes, right? Do your archiving, your a little escapades and learning how to create metadata and how to basically learn about artifacts. But be sure that you're at the top of the game, because if you're not, it's very competitive. So that's a little thing about Mom, yeah.
100%.
Yeah, very true. And I kind of wanted to...
Yeah.
So you graduated from Sunnyview School, obviously,
yes,
when you were 18 or 17, 18, and you moved to the States. You moved to New York to study there. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes.
What was that transition like? Because obviously, especially back then, that must have been the 80s, 90s?
Yes, early 90s, yeah. Very early 90s.
That transition from Malaga, Torremolinos to New York must have been from 0 to 100.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. Well, we've always been such a global family, right? And yeah. I kind of look around the table right now, and everybody's so international, right? And so if you think about where we were at Sunnyview, Al, your mom, all of our classmates came from different parts of the world, mainly Europe, but different parts of the world. Some were Americans, many were Indian, right? It was such a global environment. And back home, our home itself was international, right? Mom was, your grandma was from Spain, your grandfather was Nicaraguan. So, for me, thinking of the world as a larger place than Malaga, it was completely natural, because this is what we talked about at school. It's what I learned from my friends. It's what I learned back home. So for me, leaving Spain was normal in the sense that, I needed to find something that I could do, right? I never had, we didn't graduate with Spanish high school diplomas, so for us, going to Spanish university would have been very difficult. But I did have an American high school diploma, and I did get into a couple of colleges. So even though we had no money, I had this crazy notion that if I got there, then I could make it happen. And somehow your grandparents, I don't know, scraped enough to get me a ticket, not to the US, but to Nicaragua, because I needed to get a US visa before I could travel to the US. And so that's what I did. And I'll never forget that. I mean, that first trip to me was the first time ever leaving Spain, right? And for me, it was just amazing. I cherished that moment, right? I remember it was a night flight out of Madrid, Barajas, to Nicaragua with a stopover in the Dominican Republic. I'll never forget looking out the window, had a window seat, and seeing the moon. Never forget that moon. And I won't forget landing into the Dominican Republic in the middle of the night there. I think it was 2 or 3 a.m. And just stepping out of the plane and this sort of punch of tropical humidity that I'd never experienced hitting me in the face, and I thought, yes, what an amazing world. And then landing in Nicaragua and spending 2 weeks there.
Mm-hmm. And that was 1990,
1990, I think, 91. I think it was 91. So I spent 2 weeks in Managua, where I was there just to get my U.S. visa, which in itself was a chore. But yeah, that was the trip before New York. And then you just imagine landing in New York City and, stepping into Times Square for the first time ever. Yeah. It was just like, I've died and I'm in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, it was really energizing. For me, it was an amazing sort of adventure to be on. And I couldn't, I was dirt broke, didn't know what my next steps would be, but I was just so happy to be there.
Yeah. I don't know, I felt this before I moved to Ireland. I had this sense of just needing to move somewhere else and kind of experience the world. That's obviously now I when I'm there, I miss Spain and I love Spain dearly. It's especially Malaga, I love it so much, but especially probably say maybe the year or maybe 6 months before I left, once I knew that I was definitely going to Ireland, and well, not definitely, but that was the plan and that I was leaving. I don't know if you experienced this as well when you moved to the UK. Just the need to also like kind of independentize. I don't know if you can say that in English, but anyways, be independent.
Yeah.
In a way.
I didn't have that problem so much, but
yeah, obviously you didn't.
You were
Mr. Independent.
Finally, I'm allowed to do my own thing.
I think it's a sense of elation you get. I mean, that's where I remember when I landed in the UK for the first time. I wasn't alone. I was with Fred, but I'd never been abroad before either. I'd been in Madrid, but always under the auspice and the umbrella of the family, which is really not the same. But when I stepped down in the UK, pretty much like Chendo, I smelled something totally different to Spain. I smelled, it was cold, it was humid, and it was night. I seem to remember it wasn't
always night.
Yeah, it's always night. But the next day, the first thing I saw was trees with their leaves falling out, and yellow trees. I'd never seen yellow trees in my life because you don't get seasons here in the south of Spain. It's just either winter or summer, right?
Yeah.
I'd never seen forests with yellow trees, yellow and red trees, and I love that. I think, just like Chendo, I said, this is the beginning of something new for me, right? And then anything else that happened afterwards was different, but that very moment was really stuck to me.
I think there's two parts of that sensation for us, or for me anyway. And there's the career part, because you're kind of raised to believe that your career is not going to be here. I'm saying that's a good thing, but I was raised.
That's very true.
And then separately, there was the more fun part, which is the creative part. You've been reading all these books about all these adventures people had, artists had, poets had in New York, in Morocco, and wherever, in London, And here again, we lived in our imagination here because we were in this beautiful paradise. But it isn't the most creatively, it isn't that.
Yeah.
So this like New York or London or these sort of places, suddenly you get excited that all this stuff, all this life that's going on, all this, and isn't it? The creative juices.
Totally. I mean, at that time, Malaga in the 90s, in the early 90s, was hardly a cosmopolitan hub. It was a tourist hub.
Yeah.
But tourists at that time just came down for the beach. They didn't want to go to the theater in Malaga, so there was nothing.
I mean, but also, consider, I think it's more, sometimes to get a better life for yourself, you have to look beyond where you are. And the reality is, growing up here in the coast was and still is full of people who have moved here looking for a better life, right? Your grandparents, right? As an example. And so many other families whose parents literally up and left wherever they were from, either the UK or the US, looking for opportunity here. And then a few Scandinavians who were here like just to not pay taxes. But anyway, that's a different cohort altogether, right? But I think it's sort of this idea that, sometimes, you look for opportunity outside of your neighborhood for whatever reason, for whatever your personal reason might be.
Well, in our case, we're trained for that, weren't we? Like Fred just said before, that's what they taught us at St. Louis School. You're not Spanish, you can't study in Spain, so you have to go away. And because all our friends were foreigners, we couldn't have Spanish people at school.
But it was also the mid-'80s when we were gearing up to this, the yuppie period.
Exactly.
And this, just around the time that we kind of finished high school, then there was a huge world recession. But up to that point, the idea was you'd go do a degree in economics and become a millionaire, a yuppie, and have $1 million and get a Ferrari. Done. It was kind of like the script.
Yeah, that was the end. Yeah, that's what we saw on TV. That's what.
Yeah. And then by the time we got there was a world recession and there were no jobs, and that's the Generation X slogan of overeducated, underemployed is just nails it in that sense. But back to so you got to New York, yeah, and you were studying there at Queen's College.
Well, I got into it, so I thought I was just ignorant. I got into it where I thought I could maybe talk myself into some kind of financial aid, which of course was out of the question. So,
what did you try to get
Mike
into?
Pettis recommended city.
What was NYU? What were you trying to get into? What course?
I hadn't decided. I think probably business, something like that. I think it was. Yeah, I probably would have started in business, something similar.
Sorry, carry on.
No, but and then Mike Pettis, who was a great friend and great help and sponsored me during that time, suggested, look, go to City College, it's much cheaper, start there, and then try and find your way. So that's what I did. I got into City University. Again, amazing. I can't never forget the day that I was there. Registering and getting my picture taken and getting my my vaccines put on. I was like, my gosh, I'd made it. So yeah, that was the beginning of 3 amazing years in New York before coming back to Spain. Yeah.
So you said you came back here.
Yeah.
You were here for a couple of years.
Came back here. I think I think so, but maybe a year, maybe barely a year, because we came back, and then this is when I kind of started stumbling around a little bit. My first objective was to get into the art scene. So again, through another Sunny viewer, Ben Gordon, he was connected with a few people in Malaga who were involved with different artist collectives. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of hooked up with them. I used to hang with them. They had an apartment somewhere in downtown Malaga, in the centro de Malaga. And they would just gather there. Some of them were photographers, some of them were art painters. Nobody really worked for a living as far as I could see. They just sat around smoking joints and, basically doing their art. But to me it was interesting. I'd never been involved in a group like that. So I was kind of a hanger-on. And then, I started getting these jobs, with during the day. With Glenn and so on. So I kind of moved away from that artsy kind of group to just, try and work and get some money. But, it was clear to me that, I didn't have a university degree. I was getting turned down for jobs stocking shelves at, Aldi and whatever, I mean? It's like, well, if I'm not good enough to get a job at Aldi, then, I don't know what I'm doing here. So it was clear to me that I needed to look outside to try and get opportunities, right? Yeah. And I think I wasn't wrong. And so then this is why the move to London was easy for me to make that decision. And I had a chat with Lorena, whom I'd only been dating for a few months. And I said, look, this opportunity, imagine, this amazing opportunity to, drill holes and install cable in London, for 75 quid a week. Popped up. I need to take it, right? It's like
follow your dreams.
I mean, I'll be a fool to let this pass, right? It's like, you know what I mean? It's like once in a lifetime,
At this point, we'd already gone to England, hadn't we?
You guys were already there. You were not Surbiton, is that no?
Surbiton, yeah.
Surbiton, right?
Kingston upon Thames, Surbiton, around
there. Yeah.
But I don't know if by that time we'd moved to Nottingham already or not.
No, you hadn't. You were in
when he
Surbiton.
arrived, because we got
Yeah,
photographs
that's right, yeah, we were in
of
Surbiton,
at
yeah.
the Tallworth.
Yeah,
Yes.
you know, it was the
Surbiton,
options era.
Yeah.
Or before the options
yeah.
era, right?
For sure.
So they were already there, and so okay, they're offering me.
In fact, you worked the options a couple of shifts, right?
I clean glasses. Yes, I pick glasses. Yeah,
Man.
and the body shop. I think
You also worked in the
I
body
worked
shop.
in the body shop. Yes, yes,
We're all sharing a job.
exactly. It was like
That's great. That's great.
So I had connections who were already living there. I had a job opportunity. It's like I'm going to take it.
It's the CEO of Aldi.
That's it.
No, go get it. No, we can cut this off.
Another thing to add was when you came over to visit me in Boston, you told me that there's like a lot of similarities between the two of us when we were at the same age. When you were in 22, you were in New York City. Now, when I'm 22, I'm in Boston. We were both like kind of like living in the Northeast and like trying to like make something for ourselves.
100%, living independently for the first time. I think, in my case, it was a little bit, more challenging maybe, like lower budget. I remember I used to live in Queens, in a house it had a number of bedrooms, and I used to rent the smallest one, but the place was, you could literally, like, I'm not shitting you could literally hear the roaches, the minute the lights went off, scuttling around, and then if you ever stepped anywhere in the middle of the night and turned the light on, you could see them like, just be like, literally, like, but for me, I didn't care. That was amazing. It was a life. It was like,
all in all,
I made it.
You were in New York for around 3 years or so.
Around 3 years, yeah.
Looking back now, as opposed to back then,
Yeah.
were they enjoyable years? Did you enjoy them? I'm pretty sure they were very formative. I'm not worried. Nobody doubts that.
The happiest of my life.
Yeah?
Happiest of my life.
Was there no moment where you woke up thinking like, man, I just gotta go back to Spain. This sucks. Because you had no money. You were shuttling between places to live.
This is true.
And trying to. I think at one point you guys were trying to sell books in the street. Right?
No, we were very successful. We were successful.
That's when we were peaking.
We were very successful booksellers.
What was that?
It's for you, but it was what I was waiting for.
Sorry about that.
Nice.
To be fair, that was when things were starting to work out well, wasn't it? At that point, it was just because of my father passing away that kind of prompted the departure.
I mean, those years were amazing. And I felt like I was part of something grungy. Of course I wasn't. Right? I used to be in the Lower East Side.
You are part of it. You're just a very small part.
Yeah, but I had this grandiose ideas like, no, this is, I'm like, this is how Lou Reed started, right?
That was like my... When I was in the UK and I was trying to become a musician, so to speak, with a band and rehearsing every week and doing gigs in the White Lion. Which White Lion? Every single White Lion, and Sleepy Turtle or whatever there was around London. I felt like I was part of something. I didn't like the band. We were making good music. And I wasn't part of something really. I was just a guy trying to, just playing songs in a pub like hundreds of others. But at the time, I felt like I was part of something. I was excited for it. Eventually I got bored of it, but but I don't know. That's how I remember. I don't know if it was like that when you remember me for it. But I was, I used to love going to rehearsals and try to pretend.
And I think, like
music.
To a certain extent, it'd be hard for young men like Gabe or Victor to live that way. I don't know that you can do that anymore, or maybe you can, but I just think it's hard to. How do you come back from something like that? You know what I mean? Like we managed to to carve up careers after this.
I think it's hard. I think this is something that we've been talking about in our podcast as well. It's hard in the modern way of bringing up your child. Because we went through all that, we probably even if we didn't do it consciously, we probably subconsciously in our mind said it was great times, but they were really, really tough. When you have a child, you probably think, I don't want my child to go through that.
True.
So we've worked for that. So
True.
By working from that, we haven't actually prepared you for any of that. So, but I mean, the human creature is resilient. By just because the Generation X had it hard, it doesn't mean that you guys have it easy. You just haven't seen it yet. You might do. Who knows? Maybe the next.
Yeah, I
10
guess
years
every
is another
generation has their
recession.
hardship in their own
And
way, I
with that.
suppose. Yeah.
You know, what's hard for us might be not exist for you, but you got your own hardships. You know, you got your exams and you got your things to worry about that you're not telling us, right?
So Uncle Al, I would gotta say that this was not lost on me because when we were having this conversation comparing Boston to New York, I basically told my father, wow, this makes me so much grateful for all the sacrifices that you made because it allowed you to provide like a really amazing environment for me and it really helped you to support the family.
Yeah, but
support other people.
you make sacrifices of your own. You're a
That's-
fighter too.
That's true,
ever since the day
but
you
you
were born.
truly built the bedrock for the Chavarrias. And I respect that, and I do acknowledge that. I never forgot. I do not want to be, if there's one thing I don't want to become, it's ungrateful. I always want to realize other people's efforts and what they place in the world. I'm trying to make it, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, it's a good philosophy.
Yeah, I'm trying to make my own efforts to kind of like build up for the next generation as well. I'm trying to invest and also like donate money to make sure that we have better technologies by the time I'm in my 30s, because that's really going to help my family. That is like one thing that I'm really thinking about. It's future generations of Chavarrias, how to improve their lives and you know, how to make a good environment like my dad did to me. So
Yeah, you work hard all your life too, kiddo.
I need to work harder.
And Gabe too.
I need to
Like
work
you guys
harder.
are hard workers.
But the
You know, it hasn't
anxiety,
been easy.
the anxiety to always work harder, it's kind of in there, and that's a good thing. You had it too. You had it too, and that's
I
why
still have it.
You still have it, and that's why we're here. That's why we have opulence, and no, I would not say excess, but we have what we need.
100%, dude.
We're a bunch of hard workers here, aren't we?
You know, that's good.
But all of us have been really hard workers, right? That's which I think is, I mean, it is what it is, right? I wish I hadn't had to, lift a finger in my life, but, but unfortunately that hasn't been the case. So, at least we've had discipline.
But it also shapes you in your life and in your decisions later on as well, doesn't it?
I guess so. I suppose so. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so you mentioned before that you had there was a job posting of a visa job in Miami. Did you directly take that? Did you listen to Lorena's advice or apply
Yeah,
for it?
I ended up applying. I applied for it, and
Did you get it?
I got it. Yeah, that's how we ended up. I think what happened was that there was a person I knew who used to run our business in Portugal and Spain, and he had moved to Miami. He had a big job there. He was the head of sales. And so I kind of pinged him and said, hey, like, I've seen this position. Do you think? He's like, yeah, totally, go for it, apply. So, in the end, they flew me out there, which I thought was amazing. And, I interviewed for a number of positions, in fact, and they offered me one of them. And so I took it. And for me, the big takeaway from that process is that, all of us have our personal brands and our reputation. And a lot of times I'm always amazed at how leveraging your brand and your reputation can open doors down the road or close them outright. You know what I mean? So this idea that all the world's a stage and, you're always on the spotlight, people are always watching and observing you, I think is true, right? And, if I hadn't developed a certain type of reputation or branding, thank you, when I was in London, opportunities wouldn't have appeared for me in other places. And so one of the things that I've always tried to do is, be cautious of how you curate your personal brand, because that's really who you show yourself to be to people around you, right? Either friends or partners or employers or whatever it is, right?
And how did you manage that? Because I find that quite, and it's something that I've never thought about, curating your own personal brand.
Well, my dad had a saying for that to me, especially. He would always look at me and say, "Son, when are you going to become normal?"
Like everybody starts to, oh yeah, true.
That was your grandfather being motivational.
Because my personal brand is exactly the opposite of Chendo's. I'm wearing a shirt now, but I've always been black t-shirts, slightly ripped, shave as little as possible. And I don't grow my hair because I just can't get past that afro stage.
Okay, Mr. Keith Richards, right? You say this, but you have also leveraged your own whatever, your own type of branding. You're also doing very well. You know,
do,
you've kind
and it's
of
very
risen
important.
through the ranks. So in a way, you too have been sort of.
Well, I think we all have. It's just
Yeah.
the personal brand thing is quite a modern thing. We didn't have personal brands before. Just by the nature of being who you are, you end up curating your personal brand. You know, some people do it more consciously than others. Some people it just happens naturally, but we all do. You know.
I agree.
Right.
But anyway, it's important, don't you know? And it's important to, depending on what kind of career you have or whatever, you know, to make sure of who you step on your way up, because you know you might see them again on right. The world's small. The world's very small.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
very
so
true.
you care if you're gonna. A lot of people do very well by screwing others, but if that's your game, then you have to be prepared to go all the way, right? Because you know everyone has strong internal memories.
Would you say that's your game?
Huh?
Would you say that's your game? To
No,
screw?
no, not at all. Not at all. No, no, no.
Screwing others?
Yeah.
No, I told you who I am. I'm an introvert. What I've always done is try to be as helpful as I could. Like literally, I've always enjoyed helping. I think that's, if I had to summarize it, that's my, that's kind of one thing that's consistent with me. And so, that's helped me. That's helped me, right? Because like a lot of times, you know, being helpful, which is really a simple way of saying adding value, is something people are always looking for that, right? Because most people, you know, don't like to work hard. It's a pain in the ass, right? You know, most people like to pursue their own interests. So helping others isn't necessarily like a massively popular kind of skill to have. But I had it, you know, and I was always grateful for what I had. You know, I was always, you know, the one person who had zero qualifications in a room full of MBAs from really impressive schools. So I was like, I'm just lucky to be here, right? So if I can be helpful, like, I'm not interested in becoming CEO in 10 years, right? I'm interested in seeing the world and traveling. And so for me, it was easy to develop a reputation for being helpful and especially being good in front of clients. And so I think that's what helped me a lot in my career.
It sure did, because your team that we had over for, you know, a dinner, they truly love you and they truly look up to you as a leader.
I hope so.
They sure do.
Like if
It's
that's the
authentic.
sense you got, then I'm pumped up about
That's the
that.
sense everyone has, Dad.
Cool. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Right. But anyway, that was my. But other folks they're not built that way. Other people, their DNA is like, look, I need to be managing 4,000 people in 5 years. Otherwise, my life has been a complete and abject failure. And those are the kids I told you about, right? The kids that
they step over people,
No, but they're more competitive. They always want to be the number one in everything.
But they damage their
And that's
reputation.
okay.
They damage their reputation.
No,
Because people
they have a different reputation
people
and they
who are
leverage
more
it.
sensitive, because you said that like people have like a strong internal image. People who are more sensitive are actually going to see them as people who mess them over, and they might lose opportunities as a result.
Well, we do
That's
live in
true.
a world where that kind of atmosphere is created, right?
Yes.
So you have hierarchical companies, but where you're expected to try to be the best so that you can move on to the next step.
Yes.
Of course, as you get higher, the steps get fewer and fewer, which means that
course.
only, where there's 10 of you, the next step there's only 5.
Yes.
So you have to step over people to.
Well, not exactly. I completely disagree with that. You see, Uncle Al, those who actually are altruistic and people who help each other, they're going to be like a risen up, and the people who helped him get along there will keep them up.
I think there's space for everyone, right? You don't always have to. I mean, yes, a lot of people like on their way to the top. It's tough up there. Like if you want to make it to SVP level and above, it's tough. It's really competitive. They will, the way you do well there is by making sure that the others do worse than you, right? But it's also true, to your point, Victor, that you need the people around you, right?
Yeah.
So you can't, you can be super cutthroat with your peers and all the other assholes who are out to cut your throat, right? But then you got to make sure that the people around you and below you support you, right? Because at the end of the day, they're doing the work. All you're doing is fighting everyone around you to step up. Anyway.
So, Uncle Al, you told me that your grandparent, like a relative of yours, right, said, just be normal, Al, right?
Yeah.
That
Okay.
kind of cut deep because that was very similar to what a former person at Visa said. And something that I always said was, your team did not like you, right? People were talking smack about you behind your back and were most likely kind of happy when you left, right? The same cannot be said about my dad, you know? You see, because my dad kind of like uplifts people and motivates people, they actually really wanted him to be there.
Yeah. You were talking about a boss of mine that I had who said, "You're weird."
Yeah.
So let me say,
and
you're
guess
weird.
what? Internal images.
Which is, he was right, but he was right.
Internal image was created for me. If I were in a position where he was like in an interview, if we were like in an interview, he would not have gotten the job, and even worse, he would have had a paper to the next company over telling him not to hire him.
Yeah.
It would have been that internal images. You said it yourself, Uncle Al.
Yeah. Well, when I was told to be normal, the question is, what is normal?
Yeah.
No such
to you is
thing.
not
And of
normal.
course, there's no such thing.
No such thing.
Yeah.
You do you, Uncle Al. You do you.
I always have. Can't do anything else. I'm really bad at not doing me. Everybody knows that.
So we've said that you've kind of been jumping everywhere, and throughout this whole journey of yours, moving from one city to the other, moving away thousands of kilometers away, how did you keep in touch with your family and your friends?